My husband went missing for 8 years after he abandoned me and our children for his internet hot girlfriend. Now he's back, claiming to have an offer for me. I, 40, am troubled over a recent decision I made about my family and would like to hear everyone's thoughts. To begin, my life was flipped upside down 8 years ago when my husband, Robert, abruptly announced that he was leaving me and our children. He had met a beautiful woman online and fell in love with her. His choice came out of nowhere, leaving me crushed. Robert had been acting distant and weird for weeks before the revelation, which I had dismissed as work-related stress. We had been married for over a decade and had supported each other through thick and thin. I had known him for half my life, and we had created a family together. The thought of cheating had never crossed my mind. One evening, Robert finally admitted to having met someone. These words broke my heart. He blurted out that the woman's name was Isabella, and she was the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. He'd been chatting with her for 3 months, and they'd developed a bond that made him realize he was unhappy in our marriage. Every word he said slashed through me like a dagger, and I felt a mix of rage and despair rising in my stomach. He kept telling me he still loved us, but he couldn't deny his feelings for Isabella. He insisted on meeting her in person to see whether it was going anywhere. I was overcome by a flurry of emotions, unable to make sense of what was going on, and it felt as if the walls of our home were closing in on me. My voice quivered as I questioned him if he was abandoning us and our children for this woman. He nodded slowly, explaining that, while he didn't expect me to comprehend, he needed to do this for himself. He had given it a lot of thought, and he was about to meet her and begin a new life. He informed me that he was willing to help us financially as much as possible, but he needed to follow his heart and meet the love of his life. The world crashed down around me. I couldn't believe my husband was leaving me and our children for someone he'd never met in person. My immediate reaction was to yell, plead, and do whatever it took to get him to stay. But as I glanced at his expression, I knew he'd made his decision, and there was no turning back. Robert moved away the following week, leaving me to explain to our children that their father would not be returning. Emily, at 9 years old, had 1,000 questions, but I had no solutions. Nathan, who was just 4 years old at the time, was unable to comprehend the gravity of the situation and clung to me as if he realized something was terribly wrong. During this time, I felt numb and crushed, and my children were the only thing keeping me from drowning in my misery. When I first told my family about Robert, they shared my reaction. They couldn't comprehend why my husband of many years would do such a thing. My parents urged me to pursue this officially, but I didn't have much information at the time, and I was still hopeful that my husband would return. When Robert's parents learned that their son had abandoned us, they appeared completely helpless and crushed. They called him several times, pleading with him to come back to us, but he told them the same story. Days stretched into weeks, then months. I was left to pick up the pieces, both for myself and for the children. Our relatives and friends rallied around us, bringing comfort and a shoulder to lean on. I focused on getting a career so that I could create a stable home for Emily and Nathan, but the grief of my husband's betrayal remained. During this period, Robert's parents were extremely helpful, offering financial assistance and babysitting the children whenever I needed a break. 8 years have gone by, and Robert's presence in our lives is already a distant memory. He would occasionally send us money, but he never contacted me or the children. I've essentially been a single mother throughout the years, working constantly to provide for my children and give them the love and attention they deserve. Emily occasionally remembered her father, but she soon stopped trying to contact him and learned to avoid bringing him up. Nathan, on the other hand, had hazy recollections and never mentioned him. Despite the grief of losing their father, they both grew into extraordinary people. Robert's father died unexpectedly, and we all attended his burial. Later, his family lawyer informed us that he wanted to chat with me about his will. The lawyer said that Robert's father had left some money for his grandkids. While it wasn't a large sum, it would help cover my children's education expenditures. I sat down with my children and told them that they wouldn't have to worry about college expenses anymore. Their faces lit up with joy, and seeing them so happy was very heartwarming. Knowing that we had one fewer concern on our plate made us feel lighter. After a lengthy period of uncertainty, it seemed like everything was coming together in our lives. Last week, I got a call from an unknown number. To my amazement, Robert was on the other end of the telephone. There was a flood of mixed emotions, and hearing his voice after 8 years left me stunned. He was hesitant to tell me that he needed to meet with me right away. I was perplexed, so I asked him to explain. He admitted he wanted to discuss an offer with me and insisted on seeing me. I couldn't understand why he was calling me now after so many years of not contacting me. His constant appeals were tough to ignore, so I took some time to collect my thoughts and eventually agreed to meet with him alone, albeit hesitantly. We planned to meet in a cafe near my office. As I hung up the phone, a storm of questions and uncertainties flooded my head, making me nervous about meeting him after 6 years. I decided not to tell my children anything until I met him to find out what the deal was that he kept talking about. The days before our arranged encounter were a roller coaster of emotions. I couldn't help but replay the past in my head, remembering the agony of Robert's abrupt departure. the difficulties of parenting our children alone, and the years of trying to cope with his abandonment. On the day of our appointment, I came early, nervously drinking my coffee and waiting for Robert. It wasn't long until he strolled in, hesitantly but determinedly approaching me. I saw he appeared older, worn, and different from the man I'd married. Our first conversation was full of awkward silences and tentative remarks. We skirted the elephant in the room by exchanging polite greetings and catching up on the years that had passed. It was as if we were two strangers attempting to negotiate the relics of an earlier life. Robert eventually summoned his bravery and tried to explain the cause of his unexpected presence in our lives. He talked about how Isabella didn't turn out to be the woman he expected. It turned out she was a single mother herself, but she had never told him until he had left and was standing in front of her door. Their partnership experienced various obstacles, the most serious of which was her gambling addiction, which caused her to spend all of his money. They argued frequently, but Robert chose to stick by her, afraid to give up on someone else again. However, after his father died recently, he realized how short life would be if he continued to be sad. Every day, he talked about how much he missed everyone back home and how upset he was with the decisions he had made 8 years before. Robert went on to add that he had considered returning to us several times over the years, but lacked the strength to confront us. He then explained that his father had bequeathed their lake house, which was a large property where we used to go on vacations, before Robert left us. He informed me he wanted to sell the house so he could be financially independent for the rest of his life. I nodded softly while listening to him. Robert then dropped a bombshell. He proposed that he return to us and provide our children with a lavish lifestyle. He promised me that if I let him back into my life, I would never have to work again. I looked at him in surprise as he assured me that we could spend the rest of our lives without worrying about money. Essentially, Robert wanted us to reconcile and give our family another shot, utilizing the inheritance to establish a better life together. I pondered Robert's remarks carefully, considering the possible benefits of the inheritance for our family. However, it was impossible to forget the years he had been gone, leaving me to care for our children. As much as the prospect of financial security appealed to me, I couldn't deny the anguish and resentment that had grown over the years of his abandonment, so I firmly told him that, while I appreciated the offer, I couldn't forget the previous 8 years. I informed him that I had been parenting the kids on my own while working, and that while we didn't have everything right now, we had a stable life. I told him I couldn't risk causing myself and my children any more grief. I wanted to protect, but I didn't know whether I could ever trust him not to abandon us again. Robert kept pleading with me to reconsider, his eyes filled with desperation, but I realized that allowing him back into our lives would be a major risk to our family's stability. My heart wrenched at the notion of turning down his offer, especially given the financial respite it may provide, but I couldn't ignore the emotional scars he had left. My folks had been pressing me to reconsider my decision to reject Robert's offer since our encounter. They keep reminding me that after everything he's put us through, the least he could do now is provide me and our children with a better life, free of financial problems and limits. My parents keep insisting that individuals may change, and perhaps Robert has recognized his sin and sincerely wishes to re-establish our family. They believe I am being selfish and want me to prioritize my children's comfort over my pain. I have spent many restless nights debating my options. I haven't been able to bring myself to tell my kids of Robert's return. I'm worried about how they'll respond to the news and digest the thought of their father returning to their lives after an 8-year absence. I've been questioning my own judgment, torn between the possible benefits of accepting Robert's offer and the recollections of our traumatic past. So Reddit, am I the arsehole for turning down Robert's offer and maybe preventing my children and me from having a better life? Update 1. In just a few days, I received thousands of comments and messages from readers. I'm delighted that most of you don't think I'm an asshole. I took everyone's advice and decided it was time to have an open chat with my kids about Robert. The last thing I wanted was for him to re-emerge in their lives unexpectedly. Today I sat Emily and Nathan down after dinner to gently explore the matter with them. I began telling them about their father's surprise reappearance and offered to return to our lives. Their expressions were a mix of wonder and perplexity as they attempted to understand what I was saying. When I informed them he had inherited the lake house and intended to sell it to help us financially, they reacted differently. Emily, now 17 years old, expressed a variety of emotions, including rage and shock. She was as perplexed as I was, not understanding why Robert wanted to come to us after so many years apart. Although she recalled and sometimes missed her father, she also remembered the sorrow she had suffered during his absence. She stated that while she missed having a father role in her life at first, she soon learned to live without him and no longer desired him. Nathan, who is now 12 years old, told us that he didn't remember Robert at all, so he didn't mind that I declined the offer. He tried to understand the full scope of the situation. I told them straight out that whatever they decided would happen, since I respected their thoughts and emotions. Emily stated that she had no desire to meet him, and Nathan agreed, claiming that he was satisfied with things as they were. Although the prospect of perhaps healing our family was appealing, I knew that the scars from the past were deep, and my children's well-being came first. I knew I had made the right decision by walking away from Robert that day in the cafe. Following that, I intend to discuss the next steps with my parents. Contrary to popular belief, I never intended to remain married to Robert, but he fled before we could finalize our divorce. I didn't have the resources to fight him back then, but I've recognized there's no purpose in staying married to this man any longer. Update 2. Robert's incessant calls had grown increasingly frantic over the last 2 weeks, and no matter how many times I told him I didn't want him back, he kept calling. As a non-confrontational person, his persistent attempts to approach me left me feeling besieged and emotionally drained. I was concerned that he might unexpectedly appear at my office or visit the children at school, so I decided it was time to contact his mother. She was aware of his return and appeared to be the only one who could help me comprehend his intentions and deal with his relentless pursuit. I visited with her to advise her of my plan to formally end our relationship and to voice my displeasure with his continual phone calls. It was during this chat that his mother revealed the true cause of his insistence. She said that Robert's father included a cleverly worded provision when bequeathing the lake house. He could only possess the house if he returned to our family. I had to sign the papers to back up his claim to the house. This information astonished and disappointed me. I suddenly realized why he had been following me for weeks. The primary reason he contacted me was not to reconcile or make amends with me, but to acquire ownership of the property. The entire situation felt like a terrible manipulation of emotion, and I wanted to think about my next steps carefully. After uncovering Robert's genuine intentions, I knew it was time to act. I didn't want to stay in a relationship based on manipulation and seek. As I write this, I'm seeking a lawyer who can assist me in preparing for my divorce proceedings right away. I've also spoken with my parents, who regret telling me to ponder his offer. They now understand that he has not changed over the years and support my decision to proceed with the divorce. They regret ever telling me to listen to him, and I now realize that walking away from him is the proper thing to do. I've blocked Robert for the time being, so he can no longer bother me. I intend to see him when I serve him with divorce papers. Update 3. It's been 2 months since my last update, and I can finally provide a positive update. As I previously stated, I was planning to serve Robert with divorce papers, so I contacted him under the guise of meeting him. He quickly agreed. Emily and Nathan expressed a desire to see their father one final time. They had a lot of questions, and I believed it was important for them to get some closure, despite the grief from the past. We scheduled a meeting in a neutral location, a local park, where we had shared many wonderful family moments before Robert's departure. Emily's eyes were filled with wonder and distrust as she glanced at her father, while Nathan clutched to my side awkwardly. I began by telling him that I knew his genuine reason for approaching us after so long. Robert claimed that it wasn't only the clause in his father's will that motivated him. He sincerely wanted us to give him another shot. I shook my head in astonishment, knowing that I couldn't trust every word this man said. I told him we were done, and the least he could do was provide our children with closure by answering their questions. He nodded solemnly. Emily began by asking him whether leaving us for another lady was worthwhile. Robert glanced embarrassingly down as he replied that he was lost and had made a terrible mistake. Nathan took a more direct approach, asking him if finding happiness was more essential than leaving his children with his wife. Robert took a deep breath before saying that he believed he wasn't thinking clearly at the time, and accepted that he was foolish to leave us. My smart and powerful children were unsatisfied with only those answers. Robert attempted to rationalize his affair by claiming that it was a midlife crisis. As the talk progressed, Robert revealed painful details of his life with Isabella, the difficulties they encountered, and the understanding that he had been chasing an illusion. Emily and Nathan listened intently, but I doubt they believed him. They asked him why he had never contacted us, and if he truly regretted leaving us. My children's voices were filled with pain, which I could feel. Robert acknowledged that he was overwhelmed by his own guilt and was unsure how to deal with the implications of his actions. He reaffirmed his desire for us to be complete again and stated that he could now give us a wonderful lifestyle. As I gazed into my children's eyes, I knew the decision was obvious. They, like me, did not trust him and refused to let Robert waltz back into our lives, offering money as a fast repair for the devastation he had done. It was a question of principle, standing up for the fortitude and resilience that my children and I had demonstrated over the previous 8 years in his absence. Determined, I told him that we had moved on and no longer needed him or his money. I served him the divorce papers, and he looked at them with remorse and disappointment. He pleaded with me that he truly wanted to make up for those years, but I was steadfast in my choice. He then offered to split the earnings from the sale of the lake house with me, claiming that this would benefit both of us. Emily expressed that we didn't need his charity money, and Nathan agreed, adding that we had everything we needed to be happy. At this point, I believe Robert realized what a terrible mistake he had made and began to cry. He kept apologizing to the kids, saying he had made a terrible mistake by leaving us and knew we would never forgive. That day, as I walked away from the park with Emily and Nathan, I finally felt free. It had never occurred to me that I had been quietly carrying a burden for the sake of my children. It felt amazing to see my children stand up for me and have my back. Our divorce will proceed as I have determined. I know it will be a while before I am legally free of him, but in the meantime I plan on taking some time off to be with my children. I intend to take them to Disneyland, which has been a long-awaited trip for us both. I want to make great memories with my children, full of laughter and joy, to help counter the bad recollections. I am confident that as long as we have each other, we can face whatever the future contains with courage and resilience. Despite the difficulties and the upheaval we have experienced, my children and I are on the way to healing and establishing a new, stable, and honest life. This chapter is far from over, but we will be creating our own story from now, and I'm determined to make it one full of love, trust, and progress. Update 4. Since my previous update, I have some great news to share. I was promoted at work, which feels like a major accomplishment. It took me a long time to get here, but I now have a comfortable income that allows me to give even more to my family. The promotion not only provides financial security, but also the joy of knowing that my hard work and dedication were rewarded in the end. Things are progressing nicely in the divorce proceedings. I've engaged an exceptional lawyer who, after learning about my husband's and my past, is convinced that the divorce will go smoothly. Although it may not be an easy procedure, it is vital for our closure and a new beginning. Throughout this time, my family and friends have supported me. Now that I'm making more than enough, I intend to send my children to therapy. I recognize that my children may be dealing with abandonment difficulties, and I want them to be able to process their emotions and work through any remaining concerns. I've been looking for therapists who specialize in helping children and families negotiate difficult emotions, and I've discovered one who is both sympathetic and experienced. Meanwhile, as a father, I believe in encouraging my children's interests outside of academics. Emily, my daughter, has a tremendous artistic aptitude and spends hours producing lovely paintings for our home. My son Nathan has always had a natural flair for soccer, and we spend our weekends watching him play and cheering him on. I'm proud to see my children doing well in their lives. Regarding Robert, we have not communicated, and I believe it is better to keep that way. As many of you rightly suspected, his affair partner, Isabella, approached me suddenly one day. The message was not an apology, as one would anticipate given that she was the other lady, but rather hatred and animosity toward me for purportedly taking Robert away from her. She blamed me for their breakup and accused me of being the reason he left. Isabella stormed out in her emails, calling me names and making terrible accusations. She questioned my motivations, claiming I had duped Robert into returning to our family. The texts were violent and frightening, and I couldn't help but be overwhelmed by her rage. I couldn't believe this woman had the audacity to be furious with me when she was the reason my family split up 8 years ago. I answered her by claiming that I had no desire to remain with Robert and was in the process of getting divorced. I reminded her of the sorrow and turmoil my family had experienced when Robert abandoned us for her, and I informed her that she had no right to contact me. I emphasized how our lives had been flipped upside down all those years before, and how my children had suffered as a result. I made it obvious that I never wanted him back, and that if she needed to blame anyone, it was herself and her gambling addiction. I banned her after sending her the message, and hopefully she will not try to contact me again. I do not want her to disrupt the calm life my children and I have created. In terms of Robert's mother, I speak with her on occasion because she has always treated me well. She has expressed regret about how things have turned out and has asked me to do whatever it takes to be happy. Interestingly, his mother also stated that because of my decision not to reunite with Robert, the lake house would not be given to him as his father had planned. This revelation was surprising, yet it also felt appropriate. This man's selfish acts had devastated not only our family but also another's, so he deserved to suffer. It was time to move forward and let the past go. I know it will be a difficult trip, but the healing process is well underway. My children are developing and thriving, and our future appears brighter with each new day. Story 2. When they discovered I wasn't Dad's son, my entire family abandoned me and refused to speak with me. I was raised in a nice home. My parents deeply loved each other, but they loved my siblings and me even more. They were attentive, caring, and always prioritized our needs over their own. My relationship with my parents was especially good. My father worked long hours to provide for us, but he made time for us whenever he could. He would take us fishing, teach us how to play sports, and tell us stories from his boyhood. My mother, on the other hand, was the glue that bonded our family together. She prepared great meals, assisted us with our homework, and ensured that we were always clean and presentable. I adored my parents, and I knew they loved me back. But my world came crashing down when my parents began bickering. I'd always thought of them as the ideal couple. They'd been together for as long as I could remember, and they rarely disagreed. But one day, everything changed. It began with minor disagreements, but the arguments quickly got more frequent and intense. I tried to ignore them, but it was impossible. My parents would rage at each other for hours on end, and I could hear everything from my room. One day, I overheard my father admit to having an affair years ago. My mother was furious, and she responded by admitting to having an affair of her own. The debate grew until my father questioned my paternity. I was stunned. I had never considered the notion that he was not my biological father. My mother was speechless and had no idea what to say. She looked at me with tears in her eyes, yet I could see the remorse and shame in her expression. My father rushed out of the house and my mother ran after him. After that day, everything changed. My siblings took my father's side and refused to speak to me. They were furious that my parents had cheated on each other, but especially that my mother had cheated on him and that I might not be his legitimate son. They regarded me with hatred and disgust, and I felt like an outcast in my own family. My siblings and I were caught in the thick of their disagreement, and it seemed like a bomb had detonated in our home. My parents began to regard one another with contempt, and it wasn't long before their rage spilled over upon us. My siblings, who were always close to me, abruptly turned against me. They blamed me for the breakdown in our family. They claimed that I was a reminder of my mother's affair, and that I may not even be my father's legitimate son. I was greatly upset by their words. I'd always thought of us as a close-knit family, but now it appears that we were ripped apart. My parents were distant and chilly, while my siblings were rude and vindictive. I tried to speak with my parents, but they were constantly busy or distracted. They appeared to be obsessed by their troubles, and they had no time for me anymore. They treated me as if I didn't exist. My siblings would avoid me at all costs. They stopped asking me to their meetings and stopped speaking with me altogether. It was as if I didn't exist for them. The rejection was difficult to stomach, and I had no idea how to deal with it. I felt like I'd lost everything, including my family, house, and identity. I was lost and alone, and I wasn't sure if I'd ever find my way back. At first I tried to contact them. I contacted and texted my siblings, wanting to talk to them and resolve matters, but they never responded. I tried calling my parents, but they were constantly busy or out of the house. I was desperate to talk to anyone who could help me understand what was going on, so I went to my mother's place, intending to chat with her. She decided that a break was much needed, but when she spotted me, she told me to go. She told me I wasn't wanted there and should leave. Her comments were like a knife in my heart, and I couldn't believe my mother would say such things to me. Following that, I fell into depression. I wasn't sure who I was or where I belonged. I felt odd in my own skin, and I had no idea how to get rid of it. I stopped coming to work, hanging out with my friends, and doing the activities I enjoyed. I spent the majority of my days in bed napping, or simply staring at the ceiling. I ate little and lost a significant amount of weight. Months stretched into years, and I feared I'd never be able to overcome the darkness that had enveloped me. I hadn't heard from them for a long time. I lived so close to them, but I still felt so far away. My siblings and I spent almost all of our time at our parents' house. I missed them. I'd been so consumed by my pain that I had forgotten how supportive my friends had been all along. They would call to check on me and ask me to do activities. I was initially hesitant to go. I was pleased to wallow in my unhappiness, but I finally began to go out with them. We'd go to the movies, get some dinner, or simply hang around at home. They made me feel less alone, and for that, I was glad. I began to prioritize my own well-being, seeking therapy and support groups to help me cope with the anguish of being rejected by my family. My friends were a continual source of comfort during this period, and I sought out them more than ever before. At first, I was apprehensive about discussing what had transpired with my family. I felt embarrassed and ashamed. But as time passed, I realized that talking about it with my friends helped me process my emotions and go forward. They listened without passing judgment, providing words of comfort and support. I found consolation in interests and activities that made me happy. I resumed playing guitar, something I had abandoned when my depression set in. I discovered that playing music soothed my soul and allowed me to express my emotions. As I began to care for myself, I saw a steady improvement in my mental health. The misery and despair that had previously dominated me began to dissipate, and I began to think about the future. specifically my own. My friends were there for me every step of the way, encouraging me and offering a shoulder to lean on when things got tough. They reassured me that I was not alone and that I had people who loved and cared for me, even if my family did not. Update 1. A few years later, my grandfather unexpectedly reached out to me. He stated that he had had enough of how my family had treated me and wanted to make things right. He persuaded me and my father to take a paternity test, and despite my initial reservations, I eventually agreed. I didn't want to get involved in that murky scenario again, but I needed to know the truth. When the results came back positive, my family was astounded. They could not believe their error. They acknowledged their error and expressed regret for the grief they had caused me. They realized they had profoundly injured me and they were trying to put things right. I remember being torn by their unexpected change of heart. On the one hand, I was thrilled that my family was willing to reconcile with me. It was something I'd been wanting for a long time, and it seemed like a dream come true. But on the other hand, I couldn't get over the pain and betrayal I felt when they abandoned me. Despite their apologies and pleas, I remained skeptical. I wasn't sure whether I was ready to forgive and forget. I'd gone on and made a life for myself, and I wasn't sure I wanted to let my family back in. I was scared history would repeat itself, leaving me hurt and alone once more. Despite my struggles with my emotions, my family remained supportive. They called and wrote letters, and my parents even came up to my door. They begged me to give them the opportunity to make things right, and they pledged to do whatever it took to earn my forgiveness. I recall being overwhelmed by their perseverance. It was evident that they were deeply sorry for what they had done, and sincerely wanted to reconcile with me. But at the same time, I couldn't shake the suspicion that they were just contacting me because they felt terrible. I asked my grandfather how my family had been doing over the last 3 years, and he informed me that they had gone to treatment and that my parents were back together. It ached to hear that they had moved on without me, as if I did not exist. It made me feel excluded and undesired. Despite their requests for forgiveness, I chose not to contact them again. I did not want to revisit old wounds or put myself in a vulnerable position again. I didn't want to chance being hurt all over again. They dropped me once and could drop me again. I assured them they could go on without me as they have for years. It wouldn't make any difference. I had finally achieved peace and contentment, and I did not want them to take it away again. My friends had become like a new family to me, and they had been by my side every step of the way.